Welcome to Into the Words, a podcast from the Highlights Foundation Retreat Center. Today in the cabin are our dear friends Rob Sanders and Lesléa Newman. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Thank you both for being here. This week's a special workshop. This is Writing the Rainbow, crafting LGBTQ plus themed picture books. And this is one in the series of our essential conversations that we've been doing this year. So it's really great to have you both, Rob and Lesléa. Will you talk a little bit, who had the idea? Where did the idea for the workshop come from? And how you came up with this?
Well, Lesléa and I have been long-term friends since last summer.
All right.
Yes.
We met at a conference and immediately really did become fast friends. And soon after, we were talking about different things we could do together. And I happened to have been coming to the nonfiction workshop this past summer, and I told Lesléa about highlights, and she'd never had a chance to be here in all these years. And so we just came up with the idea and pitched that to you and Allison to say, what do you think? Could this be a possibility?
And then Rob was visiting Western Mass, staying with Jane Yolen and Heidi Stempel, and we sat down, and Rob was an unbelievable organizer because he's been a classroom teacher for so long, so it was easy to outline the whole thing and come up with a plan, and then here we are.
Great. And so talk a little bit about the format of the workshop. Maybe what a couple of the sessions that you've taught and some of the feedback pieces you're doing.
Yeah, we've had 3 or 4 general sessions, and then we are doing workshop sessions where we're really working on revision. We've done one-on-ones with our participants. We'll do that twice so that they have a chance to have feedback on their writing. What else have we done?
So some of the general sessions have been a presentation to expose participants to the backstory and the herstory of LGBTQ plus children's literature, and some have been more participatory with writing exercises. And then in the evening, we've retired to the cozy living room, which has been really wonderful for discussions. So, for example, last night, we asked each participant to bring an LGBTQ plus children's book that they had a particular fondness for and explain why. So, the participants are not just sitting back and absorbing information. They're really actively participating.
Right. And tonight will be open mic night without a mic because we're a small group and we're going to be in the living room, sitting around in our slippers with blankets, staying nice and warm and cozy, and everyone will read from their work in progress, and just to have that chance of celebrating their writing with one another.
That takes courage to read from your work in progress.
Absolutely.
Sure does.
I noticed there's such a great library that you've brought between the two of you, the collection of books in your mentor texts and sample texts that are up there. It's really been great for me to be able to see all the many titles that you've brought along.
Yeah, there are great books in the last 10 years. Of course, the history of LGBT books go back. Lesléa was one of the first with Heather Has Two Mommies.
30 years ago.
Yeah. And in the last 5 to 10 years, there's been more and more books with those themes showing up in fiction and nonfiction world. So we tried to expose people to that, and each participant, as Lesléa said, brought a book, a couple of them new to me. And so we've added to the bibliography that we'd even provided to the participants by what we discovered this week.
And even though there are more now than there have ever been, we still don't have enough by far, and we don't have nearly enough that feature characters of color, so we really have a long way to go. So hopefully there'll be great manuscripts coming out of this week, and they'll find homes, and they'll be launched out into the world.
Oh, that'd be wonderful. That's our goal.
Exactly.
Bring writers and illustrators along on their journey towards publication. So switching gears a little bit, Lesléa, you said it's 30 years since Heather Has Two Mommies has come out. Talk to me a little bit about your writing practice. Are you an everyday writer?
Theoretically, I'm an everyday writer. It doesn't always work out that way, but that's my goal. First thing in the morning, I barely wash my face, if truth be told, and I come down before the world begins and sit down and write. I write in a notebook with a pen still, and then when something gets going, I'll type it into my computer and edit it and print it out and mark it up and sometimes go back to the notebook, and I go back and forth. But everything goes through at least 20 drafts. And if I'm lucky, what goes onto the page blossoms into something that's worth somebody else taking the time to read.
That's I love to hear you know that it's at least 20 drafts. So much of what we discover here at the Highlights Foundation is that need for revision and how to dig in and do those revisions.
Well, I've always loved revising. I live in fear of the blank page. I call it page fright because I'm always afraid I won't have anything to write. And you can't revise a blank page, which is something a student said to me, and I thought that was just a brilliant line. But once I have something down on the page, I can, as one of my writing teachers used to say, pester it for a long, long time.
And so, do you work on 20 projects at a time, or do you take one at a time and try to move it along through your revision stages?
I pretty much work on one thing at a time. It takes me a long time to get an idea, but once I have an idea, I write pretty quickly. And I usually finish almost everything that I start. So, like right now, I've written a bunch of picture books. Some are forthcoming under contract, and some are looking for homes. So I switched gears, and I'm writing a book-length series of poems for adults about my dad.
Oh, wow. And have you done a lot of adult?
Yes, I started as a writer for adults, so I started as a poet, which is still my first love. I studied with Allen Ginsberg at the Jack Kerouac School of Disembodied Poetics. I was his teaching assistant, and so I still think of myself primarily as a poet, and picture books are very similar to poetry in brevity, in lyricism, in poetic techniques such as repetition and alliteration and metaphor. So even if I'm writing a picture book that's in prose, I still think of it as a poem.
Yeah, and as I was listening to your talk this morning, you were talking about the, I want to say sing-song. That wasn't the word you used, but you were talking about the lyricism of the words as you were reading.
And the rhythm.
And the rhythm. And then you got into the page turn when you were reading Sparkle Boy.
Right. So the page turn is very much like a line break or a stanza break of a poem. It gives, it forces or invites the reader to pause before going on, and there has to be a reason for that pause.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
So, Rob, you're a classroom teacher.
I'm a classroom teacher, second grade this year.
Wow. So where does the writing happen for you?
My writing looks much different than Lesléa's, that I write in the in-between moments because I have a full-time job and then a writing career and all the things associated with writing. So the moments I can find is when I write. Might be, I always am at school at least an hour early. So it might be after my classroom's all ready and I'm waiting for students that I sit down and do some writing. I might rush home. I might do that during my lunch hour, weekends, holidays, summers. Those are all times that I'm finding time to write. And always, unlike Lesléa, have multiple things going on because my mind just kind of works that way. And I have many projects started, many things, plates spinning, many things in various stages of process.
Just in this weekend, Rob has come up with, I think, maybe 30 ideas for new books. I mean, it's just been incredible.
I love to go around to people and say, you know what you should write? It's so much easier than writing it yourself. And so I've told Lesléa many times this weekend, here's what you should do.
Yeah.
Just needs all the work that it takes to turn it into a full story. So for our listeners, will you give a little overview of one or two of your titles, maybe a recent title, so we know Rob and one of Rob's books?
Yeah. Well, why don't I give you 2 recent titles and 1 upcoming title? How about that? Last year, that's this year, isn't it? 2019, they're already released, so I'm calling them last year. I had a fiction and nonfiction books come out. My nonfiction was Stonewall, Building an Uprising, a Revolution, which was the first picture book about the Stonewall Uprising, which many consider the beginning of the modern gay rights movement in America, which we would now call the LGBTQ rights movement. And then in fall came Ball and Balloon, which is just a silly little fiction book, lighthearted friendship story. And so I love being able to write both those kinds of books, the lighthearted and the serious, the life-changing and the life-enhancing kinds of stories. Next year, I have 3 books coming out. 2 nonfictions come out in May. One of those is called The Fighting Infantryman, the story of Albert D.J. Cashier, transgender Civil War soldier. And then a book about Mayor Pete Buttigieg will come out in May as well. So I'm very excited about those 2 biographies, which could not be more different and span, 150 years of American history between the 2 of them.
Oh, fascinating. Thank you.
Yeah.
And Lesléa?
Well, before I talk about myself, I just want to reiterate how much I admire Rob's productivity and versatility. It's very inspiring.
Well, that's likewise.
We're a mutual admiration society. So my most recent LGBTQ title is Sparkle Boy, which was published by Lee and Low and illustrated by Maria Mola, which is about a little boy named Casey who likes to wear sparkly things just like his sister. My most recent book was called Gittle's Journey, an Ellis Island Story, which was illustrated by Amy June Bates and published by Abrams, and it's a story based on my own family history of immigration to America around the early 1900s. And then in January, I have a book coming out called Welcoming Elijah, A Passover Tale with a Tale, which is about a cat who finds a home during the first night of Passover, during a Seder, and that is coming out from Charlesbridge and illustrated by Susan Gall. And I also have, 2020 is a big year for me. I also have a book coming out called, my first bilingual book, actually. It's called The Song of the Coquí, Canción de los Coquís, and it is coming out from Lee and Low and illustrated by Elizabeth Baez, and it takes place on the island of Puerto Rico, where my spouse is from, during Hurricane Maria.
Oh, wow.
And then I also have a book coming out called Remembering Ethan from Imagination Press, and it was a difficult book to sell. It's about a little girl whose big brother dies. So Imagination Press is affiliated with the American Psychology Association, so they were the perfect press because they will know how to place that. And they also wrote a lovely afterword in the back, a note to parents and teachers about how to use this book with children.
Sounds like a valuable book.
I hope so. I hope it'll be received that way.
Well, thank you, Rob and Lesléa, for joining us here at the Highlights Foundation and for joining us on our podcast, Into the Words.
Thank you. My pleasure.
We are dedicated to continuing our 35 plus years of improving the quality of children's literature through the teaching of craft at the Highlights Foundation. So thank you for being a part of that with us, but thank you for everything you do to believe in that ideal that children are the world's most important people.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.